The morning I walked into that courtroom, a man in a $3,000 suit looked at me and laughed, not loudly, not meanly. Just the small, involuntary laugh of a person who has seen something that doesn't belong and can't quite help reacting to it. I was wearing my work pants. They were clean. I had pressed them the night before on the ironing board in my kitchen, while my son Marcus watched from the doorway and told me I looked fine. "Dad, you look fine." I had my good boots on, the ones I keep for funerals and school events and the occasional situation like this one. I had a manila folder under my arm with 12 pages of notes I had typed myself at the kitchen table over 4 consecutive evenings. I had driven 40 minutes to get there in my van with the pipe wrench decal on the side door that I keep meaning to repaint and never do. And I walked into that courtroom and a man who was about to lose $14 million laughed at me. His name was Gerald Fitch. He was 56 years old, founder of Fitch Development Group, builder of approximately 200 residential and commercial properties across 3 counties in the last 22 years. He was the defendant. I was, technically, a witness for the opposing side, and he laughed because he looked at me and saw a plumber, and in his experience, plumbers did not change the outcome of things like this. In his experience, plumbers fixed what was broken under your sink and sent you a bill and went away. In his experience, a man in pressed work pants with a pipe wrench on his van was not a variable worth accounting for. I want to tell you that I understood why he laughed. I am not saying it didn't sting, because it did, the way these things always sting when you are 53 years old and have spent your whole working life being the man people call when something is wrong and forget the moment it is right again. But I understood it, because I have spent 26 years being invisible in the rooms where the important decisions get made, and I know exactly what I look like walking into one of them. My name is Cal Briggs. I am 53 years old. I have run Briggs Plumbing and Mechanical out of a shop on Route 9 in Delwood, Connecticut for 21 years. Before that, I apprenticed under my Uncle Ray for 5 years, and before that I was 18 years old with no particular direction, and a father who told me that a man who could fix the things other men couldn't was never going to go hungry. My father was right about that, as he was right about most practical things and wrong about most of the rest. I have a son named Marcus. He is 22 years old, studies engineering at UConn, and is the finest thing I have ever done by a margin so large it is almost embarrassing to compare it to anything else. His mother and I divorced when Marcus was 9. It was the kind of divorce that is no one's villain and everyone's loss, the kind where 2 people who were genuinely good to each other simply grew into shapes that no longer fit together, and the kindest thing was to stop pretending otherwise. She lives in Wethersfield now. Marcus splits holidays between us and complains about neither. I raised him on the road mostly, which is to say in the van, on job sites, in the kitchens and basements and mechanical rooms of other people's houses while I worked, and he did homework in a camping chair I kept folded behind the passenger seat. He learned to read a blueprint before he learned to drive. He knows the difference between copper and CPVC by touch. He has never once in his life been precious about getting his hands dirty. I am prouder of that than I am of almost anything. The case that brought me to that courtroom had started, as most things in my experience start, with water going somewhere it was not supposed to go. Specifically, into the basement units of a residential development called Millbrook Commons, a 48-unit condominium complex that Gerald Fitch's company had built and sold between 2018 and 2020 in the town of Grover's Mill, Connecticut. The people who had bought those basement units had been promised, in writing, in their purchase agreements, in the marketing materials, and in the representations of the sales staff, that the drainage and waterproofing systems met or exceeded current Connecticut residential building code. They had paid between $280,000 and $340,000 each for those units, and starting in the spring of 2021, their basements had flooded. Not dramatically. Not all at once. The way these things happen when the problem is structural and not accidental. Slowly, persistently, expensively, with the particular cruelty of a problem that keeps coming back, no matter what stopgap you throw at it. 11 families. Combined losses in remediation costs, property damage, and diminished resale value that the plaintiff's attorney, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who I had spoken to twice on the phone before the trial, had calculated at just over $14 million. Gerald Fitch's position, represented by 3 attorneys from a Hartford firm, whose names I could not keep straight, was that the flooding was caused by abnormal weather events and improper maintenance by the homeowners, and that his company had built to code and bore no responsibility. Sandra Okafor's position was that the drainage system, as installed, was fundamentally non-compliant, had been approved through a permit process that was, to put it charitably, expedited, and that Gerald Fitch had known about the deficiencies before the units were sold and had sold them anyway. I had been called because of a job I had done in February of 2022. One of the Millbrook Commons homeowners, a woman named Patricia Gear, had called me about standing water in her unit. I had gone out, looked at the drainage system, written up my assessment, done a temporary remediation, and given her a copy of my written notes, because that is what I do on every job. I write down what I find, what I did, and what I think the underlying cause is, in plain language, so the homeowner has a record. Patricia Gear had given that written assessment to Sandra Okafor. Sandra Okafor had called me. And that was how a plumber from Delwood ended up in a Hartford courthouse on a Tuesday morning in March, with pressed work pants and a pipe wrench on his van. I want to tell you about the courtroom itself, because the physical facts of a place matter to how you feel inside it, and I think it is important that you understand how I felt. It was a large room. Dark wood paneling, high ceilings, the particular smell of institutions that have been institutions for a long time. The gallery behind the bar had maybe 30 people in it. Some were the Millbrook homeowners. Some were press. Some were people who attend trials the way other people attend other public events, out of interest or boredom or both. The judge was a man named the Honorable Robert Crane, 61 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of face that has heard so many things for so long that it has learned to receive all of them with the same measured attention. He had been on the bench for 19 years. He was not a man who impressed easily or rattled easily or hurried for anyone. Gerald Fitch sat at the defendant's table with his 3 attorneys in a row, and the particular posture of a man who has been in rooms like this before and has always come out the other side intact. He was large, well-groomed, with the tan of someone who winters somewhere warm. When I walked in, he turned in his chair and looked at me, and that was when he laughed. The small laugh. I watched it happen, and I filed it away, and I walked to where Sandra Okafor indicated, and I sat down, and I put my folder on my knee, and I waited. Sandra Okafor called me to the stand at 11:14 in the morning. I walked up, took the oath, sat down, and looked at the room. From the witness stand, you can see everything at once. The judge directly ahead and above. The attorneys on both sides. The gallery behind. Gerald Fitch at his table, now composed, now watching me with the professional attention of a man who has been told by his lawyers to take every witness seriously regardless of what he personally thinks. Sandra Okafor began with my background. 26 years in plumbing and mechanical. Licensed master plumber in Connecticut since 2004. Certified in residential and commercial drainage systems. Member of the State Licensing Board's Continuing Education Committee for 8 years. She walked me through the February 2022 job at Patricia Gear's unit. What I had found, what it had told me, what my written assessment had concluded. I answered in plain language. I did not use jargon I didn't need. My father had taught me that the most dangerous thing a tradesman can do in a room full of people who don't know his trade is to hide behind the language of it. If you can't explain what you found in words a homeowner can understand, he used to say, then you don't actually understand what you found. I explained what I had found in words a homeowner could understand. Sandra Okafor sat down. The lead attorney for Gerald Fitch stood up. His name was Hargrove. He was about 45, extremely well-tailored, with the confident, unhurried manner of someone who cross-examines witnesses for a living and has long since stopped finding it difficult. He looked at me for a moment the way you look at something you have already decided is not a problem. He said, "Mr. Briggs, you are a plumber." I said, "Yes." He said, "You are not an engineer." I said, "No." He said, "You are not a licensed building inspector." I said, "No." He said, "You have no formal training in building code compliance assessment." I said, "I have 26 years of practical experience in residential drainage systems, which in my observation is sometimes more useful than formal training in identifying what has actually gone wrong versus what the paperwork says should have gone right." Hargrove paused for one beat. Then he continued. He said, "Mr. Briggs, the drainage system at Millbrook Commons was inspected and approved by the town of Grover's Mill Building Department. Are you saying the town inspector was wrong?" I said, "I am saying the installation I observed in February 2022 did not match what a compliant drainage system for that soil classification and water table depth would look like. Whether the inspector was wrong, or whether what was inspected was different from what was installed, I can't tell you. I can only tell you what I saw when I got there." Hargrove looked at me for a moment. He tried a different direction. He said, "Briggs, you visited one unit out of 48. You spent approximately 3 hours on site. You are asking this court to accept your assessment of an entire complex's drainage infrastructure based on 3 hours in one basement." I said, "I am asking this court to consider what I found in that one basement and what it indicates about the system as a whole. One compromised junction in a shared drainage system tells you something about the system. It's the same as a single corroded pipe fitting in a supply line. You don't need to open every wall in the house to know the pipes are old." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. In the gallery, I heard someone shift in their seat. Judge Crane had not moved. He was looking at me with the measured attention he apparently gave everything. Gerald Fitch at his table had stopped looking casual. Hargrove tried once more. He picked up a document. He said, "I'd like to direct your attention to the engineering report submitted by the defendant's expert, Dr. Alan Marsh of Marsh and Associates, in which Dr. Marsh concludes that the drainage system at Millbrook Commons was installed within acceptable parameters, and that the flooding experienced by residents was primarily attributable to unprecedented rainfall events in the spring and summer of 2021. He looked up from the document. "Mr. Briggs, Dr. Marsh has a PhD in civil engineering and 30 years of experience. Are you, a plumber, seriously suggesting that your 3-hour assessment should carry more weight than Dr. Marsh's expert report?" I looked at him. I thought about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. I thought about Marcus in the camping chair doing homework while I worked. I thought about my father telling me that a man who can fix the things other men can't is never going to go hungry. I thought about the 11 families in that gallery who had bought homes they were promised were sound and had spent 3 years watching water ruin them. And then I said the 7 words. I said, "I read Dr. Marsh's report. He made a mistake." The room went quiet in a specific way. Not dramatic silence, not movie silence. The specific quiet of a room where everyone has just recalibrated their attention at the same moment. Hargrove looked at me. He said, carefully, "I beg your pardon." I said, "Dr. Marsh's report calculates the drainage capacity requirement for Millbrook Commons using a soil permeability coefficient of 0.45 inches per hour. That is the standard coefficient for loamy soil. The soil classification for the Grover's Mill parcel where Millbrook Commons sits is documented in the town's own geological survey as silty clay. The correct permeability coefficient for silty clay is 0.6 inches per hour. That is not a minor rounding difference. That is a 7-fold error in the base calculation. If you run the drainage capacity numbers with the correct soil coefficient, the system as installed handles approximately 14% of the water load it was required to handle under Connecticut residential code for that soil type and that water table depth. The rain events in 2021 were not unprecedented. I pulled the NOAA data for Grover's Mill going back 40 years. 3 of the last 12 years had higher rainfall totals than 2021. The system would have flooded in any of them. It was not built for the ground it was built on. The room stayed quiet. Hargrove did not say anything for a moment. He looked at his papers. He looked at me. He looked at Gerald Fitch, whose face had done something that faces do when a person realizes, in public, in front of people, that something they believed was solid is not solid. Judge Crane leaned forward slightly, not dramatically, just enough to indicate that he was going to speak. He said, "Mr. Briggs, can you point me to the documentation for the soil classification you referenced?" I said, "Yes, Your Honor. Page 7 of the Grover's Mill Municipal Geological Survey, published 2014, available through the town clerk's office. The parcel number is on the site plan filed with the original building permit application. I also have a printout in my folder if it would be useful to the court." Judge Crane looked at me for a moment. He said, "It would." I opened my folder. I took out the page. The court officer came and got it. Judge Crane read it. He read it the way he appeared to read everything, completely, without hurry. Then he set it down and looked at Hargrove. Hargrove requested a recess. He got 20 minutes. I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench and drank the coffee Marcus had packed me in a thermos that morning, and thought about soil permeability coefficients and about the 11 families inside that room. The NOAA data had taken me 2 evenings to pull and organize. The geological survey had taken me 40 minutes to find once I knew what I was looking for. The math itself had taken me about an hour with a calculator and the Connecticut Residential Code manual I keep on the shelf above my workbench at the shop, the same shelf where my father's pipe threading tool has sat since he gave it to me in 1998. None of what I had done required a PhD. It required knowing what questions to ask and caring enough to ask them. When the recess ended and we went back inside, Hargrove's cross-examination lasted 4 more minutes. He had no further questions that were going to help him. Sandra Oakfor's redirect was brief. She asked me to walk through the soil coefficient calculation one more time for the record. I did. Slowly, in plain language. The jury, 8 people who had been sitting very quietly through most of the morning, was looking at me the way people look at something they were not expecting to understand and have just understood. Gerald Fitch was looking at the table. I was excused from the stand at 12:41 in the afternoon. I walked back through the bar and out of the courtroom, and got my coat from the hook in the lobby and went to find my van in the parking garage. Marcus had texted me twice. The first one said, "How did it go?" The second one, sent 20 minutes later, said, "Dad." The way he had said it on the phone when I told him about the garbage collector story. Just, "Dad," which in Marcus's language means, "You did the thing." I sat in the van for a moment before I started it. I thought about Gerald Fitch's laugh that morning when I walked in. I thought about it not with anger, because the anger had been gone for a long time, but with the specific understanding that comes from a lifetime of being underestimated in rooms where people have decided in advance what you are and what you are therefore capable of. The laugh is never really about you. The laugh is about what the person laughing has decided the world is made of and who is allowed to matter in it. And the thing about the world that I have learned across 53 years of living in it, and 26 years of crawling through its foundations and mechanical rooms and basement drainage systems is this: the world does not actually care what the person laughing has decided. The water goes where the physics say it goes. The numbers are what the numbers are. The soil is the soil it is regardless of what coefficient someone chose to assign it on a report. You cannot perform your way around a 7-fold calculation error. You cannot laugh your way out of silty clay. Gerald Fitch's attorneys called Sandra Oker's office the following Thursday to initiate settlement discussions. The settlement was reached 6 weeks later. I was not privy to the specific terms. Sandra Oker called me to tell me the case had resolved and to thank me. She said the soil coefficient had been the turning point. She said Judge Crane had requested a copy of my notes for the record. She said, "Cal, Where did you even find that geological survey? I said, the same place I find everything I need to know about a job before I start it. I looked it up. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, you know, most expert witnesses I work with have six-figure consulting rates. I said, I charge my standard diagnostic rate for the site visit. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. Patricia Gear told me, I want you to know that the families at Millbrook are going to be okay. I drove home on Route 9 the way I always do, past the shop, past the hardware store where I have had an account since 2003, past the elementary school Marcus attended, past the diner where my father used to take me on Saturday mornings when I was small and the coffee was bad, and the eggs were perfect and the world was a manageable size. Marcus came for dinner that Friday. He sat at the kitchen table where he had done homework in a camping chair for years, and we ate and talked about his semester, and about a drainage problem he had been assigned in his fluid mechanics class, and I told him about the soil coefficient. And he listened the way he always listens, with his full attention and no performance. Afterward, he helped me clear the table and said, Dad, you know that thing you did in that courtroom is exactly what I want to do. I said, fix plumbing. No. Walk into a room where nobody thinks you belong and be the person who actually understood the problem. I looked at him. I thought about my father. I thought about the pipe threading tool on the shelf above the workbench. I thought about Marcus in the camping chair, small, doing homework while I worked, learning without knowing he was learning. I said, that is not a bad thing to want to be. He nodded. He went home at 9. I sat in the kitchen for a while after he left with the code manual open on the table, not reading it, just having it there the way you keep certain things nearby, because of what they represent rather than what they contain. My father bought that manual in 1991. His handwriting is in the margins of 3 chapters. The notes are mostly about things that seemed important at the time and turned out to be important for longer than he expected. That is the thing about the foundations of things. They matter longer than anyone plans for them to matter. The water always eventually finds the path of least resistance. The math is always the math. And the person who actually looked at the ground before they started building always knows something the report can't cover. So here is my question for you before you go, and I mean it as a real one. Think about the last time you walked into a room where someone decided, before you opened your mouth, that you didn't belong there. And think about what you knew that they didn't. Did you say it? Did you let the laugh stop you? Because the laugh is not about you. It never was. Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one of them, and I would genuinely like to know. And if this story reached something in you, if you believe the way I have come to believe it, through foundations and drain lines and soil surveys, and 26 years of being the man people forget, until the water comes in, that the person in the room who actually did the work is always worth listening to, then do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a like so someone else finds their way here. Leave your story in the comments. I will see you in the next one. I promise it is worth staying for. I want to go back to something I skipped over, because I think it matters and I did not give it the space it deserved the first time through. The 4 evenings I spent at the kitchen table before the trial. I want to tell you what those evenings actually looked like, because they are the whole point of everything, and I brushed past them like they were unremarkable, which they were, which is exactly why they matter. The first evening I read Dr. Marsh's report straight through, all 42 pages. I read it the way I read anything technical, slowly, with a pencil, marking anything I wanted to come back to. I am not a fast reader. I have never been a fast reader. Marcus got his reading speed from his mother, who can finish a novel in an evening and remember everything in it. I read the way I work, which is carefully and without shortcuts, because in my experience shortcuts in either activity tend to announce themselves at the worst possible moment. By page 19 I had a mark next to the soil permeability number, not because I knew immediately it was wrong. Because the number felt off in the specific way that numbers feel off, when you have spent enough time with the physical reality they are supposed to represent. I have worked in the ground of this part of Connecticut for 21 years. I have dug up drain lines and water mains and waste stacks in about 60 different soil conditions across 3 counties. I know what silty clay feels like when you pull it up on a shovel. I know what it smells like. I know how water moves through it, and how it doesn't move through it, and what that means for what you put underneath a building that is going to sit on top of it for 50 years. The number in Dr. Marsh's report did not match what I knew silty clay to be. The second evening I drove to the Delwood Public Library and used their database access to pull the Grover's Mill Geological Survey. The librarian, a woman named Helen who has helped me find things I needed to know about probably a dozen times over the years, found it in 11 minutes. I photocopied page 7, drove home, sat back down at the kitchen table, and looked at the soil classification for the Millbrook Commons parcel. Silty clay. Permeability coefficient 0.6 inches per hour, not 0.45. I sat with that for a while. Then I got out my Connecticut Residential Code Manual, the one with my father's handwriting in the margins, and I worked the drainage capacity calculation from scratch using the correct number. I am not a mathematician. I used a calculator and I checked my arithmetic twice. The result was the same both times. The system, as Dr. Marsh described it, handled approximately 14% of the load it was required to handle for that soil type. The third evening I pulled the NOAA rainfall data for Grover's Mill. This took longer than I expected because the interface was not friendly, and I had to call Marcus to ask him how to filter the dataset by year, which he walked me through in about 4 minutes, while clearly working very hard not to say anything about how I use computers. I found what I was looking for. 3 of the last 12 years had higher rainfall than 2021. The flooding was not caused by exceptional weather. The flooding was caused by a drain system built for the wrong ground. The fourth evening I typed up my notes, 12 pages, plain language. I printed them at the shop and put them in a manila folder and put the folder by the door so I would not forget it in the morning. That is all I did. 4 evenings at a kitchen table. A library database, a calculator, a phone call to my son. The code manual my father bought in 1991. None of it required anything I did not already have. It only required someone to actually look. I think about the 11 families at Millbrook Commons. I think about what it costs to buy a home, the specific weight of that decision, the way you walk through a property, and try to see not just what it is, but what it will be, the life you are going to build inside it. I think about signing the papers. I think about moving in. I think about the first spring, the water in the basement, the call to the developer, the response, the second spring, the call again, the answer that it was the weather, always the weather. 3 years of being told that the ground under your home was not the problem when the ground under your home was absolutely the problem, installed wrong for what it was, by someone who either did not check or did not want to know. I do not know which of those it was for Gerald Fitch. I do not know whether he made a mistake or made a choice. That is for other people to determine. What I know is what I found when I got there, and what the numbers say, and that the numbers do not change based on who is laughing in the room. Sandra Oakford told me months later over the phone that Judge Crane had said something in chambers that she thought I should hear. She said he had told her attorneys that in 31 years on the bench, he had not often seen a lay witness reframe an expert report in real time in a way that held up to scrutiny. She said he had used the word prepared. He said the witness was prepared in a way that a lot of expert witnesses are not. I thought about that word for a while. Prepared. Helen at the library. 4 evenings. A calculator. My father's handwriting. Prepared is not a complicated thing if you care about the answer enough to go looking for it. The people who are not prepared are usually the people who decided in advance that they already knew the answer and didn't need to look. That is a mistake you can make from any position on any income level with any number of letters after your name. And it is a mistake that the ground eventually corrects, one way or another, because the ground does not care what you decided in advance. Marcus called me a few weeks after the settlement to tell me something that had happened in one of his fluid mechanics classes. The professor had been working through a drainage capacity problem on the board and had used an incorrect permeability coefficient, the standard loamy soil number, for a site that was clearly silty clay based on the problem description. Marcus had raised his hand and pointed it out. Professor had checked. Marcus had been right. He told me this the way he tells me most things, briefly, without performance, and then moved on to something else. But before he did, he said, "I knew to look because of you, Dad. Because you told me always check what the ground actually is before you trust what someone wrote down about it." I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "That is the only thing I know that is worth passing on." He said, "It's enough. I think about that sometimes on the route home from a job, on Route 9 past the shop, and the hardware store, and the school, and the diner. I think about what gets passed down, and what doesn't, and how you rarely know in the moment which category a thing is going to fall into. My grandfather passed down the pipe threading tool. My father passed down the code manual and the habit of checking the ground. I passed down the habit of checking the ground to Marcus without knowing I was doing it, on a job site when he was 11 years old, in a conversation I do not even remember having. That is how the useful things move through the world. Not through announcements or credentials or rooms where important people take you seriously. Through the ordinary work, repeated, patient, done correctly, by someone who cared enough to get it right even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. The water always finds the truth of the ground eventually. So does everything else that matters. There is one more thing I want to tell you before I let you go, and it is about Gerald Fitch. Not about what happened in the courtroom, but about something that happened 3 months after the settlement, which I heard about secondhand through Sandra Okafor, and which I have thought about more than I expected to. Gerald Fitch, according to Sandra, had retained a new engineering firm after the case closed to review all of his active development projects. All of them, not because he was legally required to. Because he had sat in a courtroom and watched a plumber from Delwood find a 7-fold calculation error in his expert's report in the space of a cross-examination. And something in that experience had apparently reached him in a way that the lawsuit itself had not. Sandra said she had heard through the other attorney that Fitch had told someone the thing that had gotten to him was not the settlement. It was the soil survey. The fact that a document publicly available through the town clerk's office, filed years before his permits were approved, clearly showed what the ground was, and that no one on his team had pulled it. Not the engineers. Not the inspectors. Not the project managers. No one had looked at the actual ground. I do not know what to do with that information exactly. I do not offer it as redemption for Gerald Fitch, because I am not in the business of deciding what redeems people and what doesn't. I offer it because it says something true about how these failures actually happen. They rarely happen because someone woke up one morning and decided to hurt 11 families. They happen because a culture of not looking builds up over years, because it is easier and faster and more profitable in the short term to trust the assumptions, to use the standard coefficient, to not pull the town survey, to let the permits go through without checking what they are permitting against. And because no one is standing in the room who cares enough or knows enough or has enough to lose to say, "Wait, what is the actual ground here?" I was that person in that courtroom not because I am exceptional. I am a plumber from Delwood who reads slowly and checks his arithmetic twice and spent 4 evenings at a kitchen table because 11 families were going to be in that room, and I was the person who had been asked to tell the truth about what I found. I did not have a choice about being thorough. The situation did not allow for anything less. My father used to say, "The job is the job." By which he meant that there is no version of the work where you get to decide which parts to do carefully and which parts to do carelessly based on whether anyone is watching. The job is the job from the first moment to the last, regardless of the audience, regardless of the room. You do it the same way every time, because if you start deciding when it matters and when it doesn't, You will eventually make the wrong call on which is which. Gerald Fitch's engineers made the wrong call on which ground survey to use. Or they did not make a call at all because they did not look. The distinction matters legally. It does not matter to the water in the basement of a family who paid $300,000 for a home they were told was sound. The job is the job. I am going to drive my route tomorrow morning the same way. I drive it every morning. The same streets, the same clients, the same careful check of what I find before I decide what to do about it. Marcus will call me sometime this week about something in his fluid mechanics class, and I will answer however I can and tell him to call his uncle Ray if I run out of useful things to say. Because Ray has forgotten more about mechanical systems than I have learned, and he answers the phone on the second ring, regardless of what time it is. The pipe threading tool is on the shelf above the workbench where it has been since 1998. The code manual is on the shelf below it, my father's handwriting still in the margins of 3 chapters, slightly faded now, still legible, still right about the things it is right about, which is most of them. The ground is what it is. And a person who bothered to look at it is never going to go hungry.